Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to take a break from sadness to talk about sadness in a couple of different ways. So we're going to use an article kind of as a springboard to go off of, but it's not going to actually cover everything that is possibly going to be said today, and that I encourage to take place in the comments. It is going to be about, one, writing the sad bad girls, the tragic, eventually, hopefully, possibly going to get into some ideas of like writing the tragic villain or the sympathetic villain. And then, of course, abusing your audience by trying to use trauma as a shortcut to sympathy, because too many people abuse a character in like chapter 1 or 2 to be like, don't you care about them? But I'm sorry, you have to make people care about your character before they care about the trauma they go through. Because if there are so many abused main characters, abused central characters, that you cannot start out by abusing that character and then trying to manipulate the reader into caring because they're a bad person if they don't care about the abuse that person went through. I'm sorry, real talk here. But you cannot shortcut your way into making readers care about your character, and it's cheap if you do that. I'm looking at you, freaking Akatar, as well. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemwy, the monthly prompt writing contest where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creativity. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit your first chapter and your cover, they will be read here on the channel on a random Monday interval to hopefully help more readers find your work, because your work deserves to be found. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the library. With that said, let's get into this. So maybe y'all are familiar with the tragedy. Does it count as a sad bad girl? Hello Kitty Must Die. The story that I read, that I reviewed last week about Fiona. I don't even know if we ever got a last name for her. We probably should have, considering she was a lawyer, but no last name for Fiona. We're going to say Choi. You know why. If you know, you know. And how she was basically Hot Topic Edgy the person. Also published in 2010 by Simon & Schuster. They should be ashamed, and so should the agent that allowed that to happen, that disaster to happen. But making your character evil, making your character vile, making your character amoral, making your character traumatized is not a shortcut to making them interesting. To making them edgy is not a shortcut to freaking interesting. And trauma is not a shortcut to sympathy. But I feel like a lot of people kind of look at these things, maybe even adore certain characters that are complex and they are dark, but then don't really know how to do it. And then they just kind of make Hot Topic the character. Now, as we talk about this, I do want to make it say, forward. I can judge tropes. I often do. I have opinions about certain things. But I don't ever think that something is always bad, or that you can't do certain things. I think it just takes, one, the knowledge on how to use it, and then to knowingly put things in place as you intend for them to be. So with that said, we're gonna get into this sad bad girl discussion through this, and trauma, because I will be the first to say Bodymore is about a hot mess of a girl. Joey is the hot mess. Now, she never talks about being traumatized. She is. And you see aspects of PTSD in the way that she acts, but it's never discussed. Hey, Tatum. It's never straight up said. And so I'm not saying that you cannot write or shouldn't use traumatized characters or trauma or put characters through things. But I'm specifically, personally, going to be talking about how you can't use trauma as a shortcut to make people care about your characters. And by you can't, I mean you can, but I judge you for it. And other readers might not, but I do. That's all that matters. Use trauma with respect. So from artshub.com, and it's from Australia, so, take it as a grain of salt as you will, because Australians, they be a certain breed of people. Let's be real. It's just like Americans be a certain breed of people. This is titled, I've Had Enough of Sad Bad Girl Novels and Sensationalized Trauma Stories. And I can tell you for sure that depending on where you go, especially if you look at a lot of discussions on Twitter, oh my gosh, one of the things that have has made me irritated the last couple of years has been specifically marking stuff as trauma, as if it's a genre to sell your book. Oh, my book is all about the trauma. My book is all about the nihilism. I know it's nihilism. I'm kind of mocking it. My book is all about the helplessness and the suffering, and it's deep if it's suffering. And if you look at a lot of what is considered literary fiction, it is a lot of wallowing in freaking privilege to suffer and be sad and traumatized, and it's exhausting. You're not suddenly deep because you're extremely, excessively sad. Okay, anyways, so stories about flawed young women have been favored by the publishing industry for some time now. Bad girl novels proliferate in the wake of Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train, while sad girl novels have evolved from the comic haplessness of Bridget Jones in the 1990s to more sobering ground with Sally Rooney's introspective bestsellers. That's also a thing, is for some reason there is a big push, and has been a big push, of like really nasty female characters in general as the main characters, not just because like they're broken or they've been traumatized and they're working through it and trauma does not look pretty, but it's like they are justified in being nasty, or they are power fantasies at being nasty. If you look at Iron Widow, where it's about a tyrant, which, you know, fair enough, you're writing a story about a tyrant, she ain't gonna be freaking nice, but you've just got all of these stories about caustic, toxic, poisonous women who are just angry at everything and angry at the world, and it continues over revenge fantasies. Revenge fantasies are like one of my least favorite genres ever. No shade on you if you write or like revenge fantasies, but they are not for me. And then this turned into sometimes there's a mixture of sad girl plus angry girl plus revenge fantasy, where they're sad and so they want revenge. Sad bad girl novels combine the best, or should I say the worst, elements of these narratives. Titles like My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. Isn't that something that was... Didn't we talk about that in the Discord? You guys, yes, we did. I recognize this cover. We definitely talked about this book at some point. Luster by Raven Lilani and Animal by Lisa Taddeo. All feature disaffected or disturbed young women acting out or willfully sabotaging their lives, despite the impressive... I'm like, borderline? Despite the impressive writing of authors such as Leilani Moshfegh and Taddeo, too many of these stories fail to keep up with their own ideas. Trauma is sensationalized, damaged characters are diminished and complicated, and challenging situations are compressed into marketable entertainment. That's probably the worst of all, like the worst offender of any trope or character design, is things are changed for commercialization, making it fake. Like, as much as you want to complain about like that's not representative of this thing, or that is a poor representative of that other thing, yeah, and when a book is about cops, when a book is about like the FBI, when a book is about a dentist, none of it is actually as is. It is all commercialized to change it from an actual one-to-one representation to actually make it more sensationalized in general, or else it wouldn't be as entertaining as entertainment. That's just the nature of entertainment as a beast. So you want to try to keep things as in essence while you clean them up in a way that is more entertaining for somebody to observe. Sometimes this is alarming, but mostly it's just disappointing. It also means the sad bad girl was a trope from the outset. Typically in her late 20s or early 30s, the sad bad girl is insecure and adrift, seething with self-doubt and drowning in denial. This just sounds like an issue with millennials. Her family is dysfunctional if not abusive. She drinks too much, makes terrible relationship choices, resents her boring job, and dreams of becoming a successful creative. Her friends, if she has any, act as sounding boards or barometers for her emotional messes. She is self-obsessed, self-serving, and self-destructive, and I'm afraid I've had enough of her. It's not that I've had enough stories about women, far from it. As a writer, I have spent most of my career focused on female narratives. I have challenged the misrepresentation of women in the music industry, explored essentialist ideas about female psyche, and confronted the diminished anti-heroine of thriller fiction. But the one thread connecting my work is all for more complex stories about psychologically nuanced women. This author should go and read Bodymore and tell me what she thinks of Joey. So, as a reader, I'm cynical. I'm frustrated by the proliferation of stories about two-dimensional women behaving badly when there is such a rich potential for transgressive, sad, bad girls. I think the fact that you can go, oh, it's sad bad girls, also speaks for like It's not good. But this is also just like all rich people, all upper class people being like, I feel unfulfilled by my great job. I want to be a creative in life. This is just the description up here with late 20s to early 30s, insecure, adrift, bad relationships with family, drowning in self-doubt and denial, dysfunctional families, probably has a drinking problem, picks terrible boyfriends, resents her job. It just sounds like a journal for feelings of self. Like, again, we're going back to Hello Kitty Must Die, where how much of that was just like vomiting personal feelings and dream journal onto a book of sorts that also partially worshipped serial killers, but also when she was friends with a serial killer, she suddenly became less interested until he was at a safe distance again, which could have been a thing on its own. Green Dot, Lost Millennial Women. Unfortunately, the much buzzed about Australian debut novel Green Dot, with its tale of a young white messed up woman searching for meaning in all of the wrong places, fails to break new ground. Well, of course, because so for me, this is all entirely, I'll be talking entirely about personal preference, and I invite you to do the same in the comments. This isn't a war on anybody's preferences. This is how we talk about stories and what speaks to us and what doesn't speak to us. I don't need a story about a person exploring their identity for their own personal titillation, for their own personal anything. There's so many books that are about like existential crises or feelings of everything is pointless, but it's not necessarily connected to their circumstances because they also recognize like the good things that are around them. They just come off as entitled and ungrateful. And I like a story that has a character that is actively pursuing something or wanting something. It doesn't have to be a big picture thing. It can literally be this person is trying to make friends, and every single time she goes somewhere, she fails at making a friend. But at least she is going out trying. She runs into issues like that self-doubt, but you constantly see her trying, or it's pointed at doing something. One of the short story ideas that I wrote a couple of years ago that I need to return to like revise and fix it. It was this story about like this girl who couldn't get out of bed. Like when she slept at night, these little tiny monsters, kind of like just little floof balls. They're not, I mean, what else are they? Creatures, whatever. They're little creatures. They're not like scary looking or anything. They're about the size of a tennis ball, maybe a little bigger. But they're little fuzzy things with little eyes. And so she'd go to sleep at night and then wake up and there were some on her. And every night that she would go to sleep, she'd wake up and there would be more on her. And then she'd end up staying in bed longer and longer and longer and didn't realize how long she had been in bed, that it's like 30 years had passed. And so these things were sort of representation or an allegory for like depression, for kind of giving up, and how it affected her, that she just went with the flow and went with this feeling of don't get out of bed, don't do anything, until so much time passed and she didn't realize how much time had passed. And so you can write stuff like that, but especially when you're doing existential, just messed up women, messed up anybody searching for meaning, they have to be actively doing something, not just messing up all of their relationships. And unfortunately, a lot of time, when you write stories or when people write stories about men looking for meaning, they're actually out in the world doing something. Whereas these books, these self-aggrandizing books that are popular in book clubs and these literary communities, there's just women who have everything given to them, who are in these privileged positions that everybody around them worships them, that they just get stuff easy, like with Fiona Choi, who didn't even have to work for her job as a freaking lawyer. It's just Sean murdered somebody and then she signed up for that job and then she got in after her initial job. And she just seemed ungrateful. She had everything handed to her. And then she was freaking mad, whatever. But unfortunately, in these searching for meaning books, these characters don't often, not always, because there are some that do, but more commonly with stuff like this, they don't go out and try to achieve. They don't go out and try to explore. And of course, women and men are going to go and explore themselves and look for meaning in different ways because of the different things that they think are important. But these are always so just self-aggrandizing that it doesn't speak to anybody, but usually the author and the author's friends in the literary community. Continuing. If you haven't already heard about The Green Dot, you will. The buzz is growing and the book is set to be a huge summertime success, sharply observed, funny and tender, set between Sydney and an unnamed British city. It's a likable enough narrative. Fans of Dolly Alderton will probably love it, but take a closer look at this frothy, sassy story and you may begin to question the appeal. Put simply, Green Dot is the tale of an office love affair between a 24-year-old Hera and Arthur, her older married colleague. Oh my gosh. You will never win me with this. So that's also part of the problem. It's like always, this woman is trying to find herself. Freaking homewrecker. Every single time. I'm sorry, I get heated on that. I don't know what it is with these women that are like, I'm so miserable. I am so miserable. You know what I'm gonna go do? Ruin somebody else's marriage. Look. No. You are not a good person. This is why you fail. What kind of meaning do you think you're going to find in doing something like that? These women are amoral, and I don't know what is the obsession with these women being like, I feel insecure, I feel so terrible, I have no worth, I'm finding meaning in somebody else's husband. Girl, I will never get over how many of these books that are like, I'm exploring myself, are just women who are justifying adultery. Maybe that's why you fail. Yes, adultery is one of the tropes that I freaking hate in justifying adultery. The unique pain and pull of first love is beautifully depicted at times, and Gray is a competent writer. I am aware that a past version of myself, one who is not so embroiled, would likely see all of this with much greater clarity, thinks Hera, when she can't get a hold of Arthur. She reflects that the old Hera would likely stick up for herself more, would find Arthur's entitlement galling, or would never wait around in the first place. I bet this character is freaking entitled and she doesn't think that she's entitled. I wonder if the author thinks that the character is entitled. I'm sorry, I don't know how you get into a cheating relationship and jank somebody around. I can't with this. I can't with these characters that cheat, that help cheat, that home wreck, and then they go feel bad for me. No. No. What did you think about the spouse? What did you think about using somebody else's spouse? You didn't stop to think about that, did ya? But for much of the novel, the tone is trite, and the characterization, although astute, is patchy. While this starts out by a fun page-turner, how? By the midway mark, the singular theme of Hera's yearning for Arthur begins to weigh. Look, that's another thing. So, I've mentioned this before when I talked about Unpregnant, which if you want to see my book review and my movie comparison to the Unpregnant book/movie, they're here on the channel. But it's hard to get people to root for your main character if it is something that you just do not agree with, because in this case, why would I ever root for Hera to win? What would I root for her? It's either she figures out that she is a piece of trash for getting involved with Arthur, and so then she goes and tells Arthur's wife that she cheated, that she helped him cheat. Or Arthur dumps his wife, and if he has children with that woman, he dumps that woman to go and be with Hera. I don't like any of this situation, so why would I want to be involved with any of it? That's one of the problems here, and it's the same thing with Unpregnant, is that if you can't, like, even want anything to do with the character, then you're not going to have a good time. And I don't know, I need a show of hands in the comments, especially because of how common the cheating spouse thing is, the girl going after a taken man, a married man, and it is seen as romantic. I need to know, show of hands in the comments, do you think that that is a romantic trope? Do you find that yourself attracted to that trope? Like, and I'm not judging you if you enjoy it. I am at this point just being like, I don't understand how popular this is, because I guess I never really hear anybody talking about it, but it's in so many books. And so is this just a close-knit community thing of like these people in this upper division of wealth that do this, that feel like this? Or is it a wider spread interest than I realize? And like, I do have strong opinions about it. I understand that. But my opinions are separate from how I think about and treat people. At the very least, I am just flabbergasted at how they think that cheating is so deep that they constantly put it in things. Conforming to the trope of lost millennial woman, Hera brims with fragile confidence and pernicious self-doubt. Disaffected, cynical, irreverent to the point of positively irritating, she inhabits her story with wit and humor, probably self-deprecating. But her relentless, or she's just caustic, which again, I hate so much of what is titled as millennial is so toxic and so annoying that I can't deal with it. You can have a fragile confidence or pernicious doubt character But the cynicism, the negativeness of all of this just gets so exhausting that, I don't know about you guys, but if you take in enough negative content, I feel it in my face. Like, I feel it in weight under my eyes that just drags my entire soul down. Do you ever experience that from reading or watching too much negative stuff? Continuing with the article, she inhabits her story with wit and humor, but her relentlessly interior perspective lacks self-reflection. There is nothing much more in the story to alleviate this. Hira's friends, Soph and Sarah, exist mainly to let the reader know Hira has friends with opinions about her behavior. Other characters function mainly to witness Hira's affair and remind her that she misses Arthur. As for Arthur, a charmingly uncool intellectual from England, he is essentially a prize who offers Hira self-validation in the form of her own emotions. What I really wanted was feelings to protect, she confesses, and here they are. So the whole thing is just everybody exists to validate the main character. Long after her affair has run its course, Hira realizes my dedication to this relationship was in effect a dedication to my belief in myself. Yet this declaration, which appears at the start of the story, doesn't afford her any insight beyond the fact that Arthur's once represented comfort and the promise of a life which didn't require me to make decisions anymore. You know, if you could go and find a single man that would more likely do that for you because he is actually single and able to offer you a spousalhood. But what would I know? Hira makes Arthur sound like a pet rock that she has tried to use to orient herself. Gray makes him sound like a cliche, an Englishman who manages to combine a high-powered job with the nervous shyness of someone who was bullied in high school. He resembles an early career Hugh Grant, bumbling around in cargo pants and a chemist-bought sunglasses. I'm wondering if at some point she realizes that she picks men that are unavailable so that she doesn't have to actually think about getting in a true relationship. Like, she likes the idea of somebody caring, of possibly being in that relationship, but not so much that she wants somebody serious that could actually threaten her singlehood, which is why she picked a married man, because she was sure that he would not leave his spouse, so she could fantasize about having a man without ever actually having the danger of that long-term commitment. But for all of this awkward British sensitivity, he avoids the subject of his marriage like the plague, which renders him spineless. The plot is littered with oversights that raise questions about the editing process. For example, when Hera moves to a strangely unidentified city in the UK, seemingly on a kind of vengeful whim. Oh great, she's vengeful against him. The entire episode is treated like a remarkable gloss. The entire episode is treated with remarkable gloss. So she has enough money to just like randomly move to UK to get at this guy for dumping her. This is, yeah, so relatable, you guys. In a country where work and accommodation are notoriously hard to acquire, Hera finds both with miraculous speed, and once there, does nothing except sleep with lots of terrible people and moon over Arthur. This, together with Gray's painfully inaccurate stereotype of British culture, including trash British coffee, pretentious British art students, and small-minded British pub-goers, continues for 50 pages, while Hera's emotional arc remains stagnant. When COVID hit, lockdown and isolation ensued again. Hera traverses these with ease. Weirdly, she makes no friends in the UK, and her flatmate Poppy, barely a whisper on the page, inexplicably comes and goes sporadically despite government restrictions. Despite being entirely alone overseas during the outbreak of a deadly virus, Hera continues to be preoccupied with nothing more than missing Arthur. I mean, to be fair, maybe she just didn't take it that seriously because honestly. Another example occurs when Hera and Arthur find themselves in Hera's estranged mother's neighborhood by a coincidence that feels contrived. Hera spies her mother outside of a restaurant, but Gray skims past the details, opening and shutting down a valuable plot opportunity within 2 paragraphs, making you wonder why it was included in the first place. I'm glad other people are questioning certain editorial choices and how it seems like editors are not really are not helping as much as they should. Gray's writing is intelligent and effervescent, and this is an entertaining debut, but at almost 400 pages, given the one-trick pony and skinny characterization, it's far too long, which seems to be another editing issue. Yeah. Hera is amusing, but far too preoccupied with herself to be in touch with her vulnerability. She asks questions of herself that she doesn't bother to answer. She is self-aware, but unable to think analytically. And while her flaws are central to her character, like too many sad bad girls, she is self-conscious, self-abasing, almost for the sake of it. And I'm guessing that it never gets addressed in any sort of meaningful way. By contrast, Lucy Traylor's new novel, Days of Innocence and Wonder, explores the search for meaning and connection with depth and sensitivity from the perspective of trauma. This is the author's third book and her first foray into contemporary fiction. It refreshingly defies familiar genre categories, being neither a straightforward thriller nor a crime. Needless to say, this is not the story of a sad bad girl, but an insightful and sensitive exploration of traumatized women. Protagonist Till is a 23-year-old woman on the run from a devastating childhood experience that continues to bleed into the present. Angry, haunted, and scared, she's not so much flawed as scarred, disrupting ideas about safety and refuge, unsettling the boundaries of space and time. This is a story about how the past shapes the present. Ultimately, Till must learn what it means for her and what she can do about it, or not. Written in response to the ongoing problem of male violence and misogyny that propelled the 2021 Women's March for Justice movement across Australia, the novel poses questions about reckoning and the loss of innocence, occasionally led by an unidentified first-person perspective that breaks through the narrative with leading questions. It also raises the issue of shattered identity. The final page responds to this in a heartbreaking fashion. At the start of the novel, Till is newly terrified and flees her parents' home in Melbourne, driving with no destination in mind, finally stopping at a fictional ghost town in Wirraoe in South Australia. Here, she sets up a camp in an old crumbling railway station and, despite her wounded, defensive, suspicious disposition, slowly begins to sense a community among the scattered inhabitants. But the deserted township, with its dusty streets and abandoned buildings, harbors dangers of its own, forcing her to choose between running again and claiming her precarious ground and facing down the threats. Elegantly written, the novel possesses a dreamlike quality reminiscent of Kate Hammer's mystery novels, though at times evocative atmosphere can feel disorienting. Perhaps this is a conscious decision designed to pitch the reader into Till's fractured psyche, where hazy memories blur the line between dreams and fleeting impressions of the past. Certainly, in its depictions of psychological trauma and the ways that children adapt in order to survive terrifying experiences, the narrative is astute and considered. There are inconsistencies. For example, addresses to structural misogyny. There are inconsistencies. For example, I found it wholly unfeasible that the guarded and mistrustful Till would invite shopkeeper Ken into her home within minutes of meeting him. And without providing spoilers, the way that Till's past continues to track her is hard to believe and not adequately explored or explained. While this pervasive and mysterious quality, While this preserves a mysterious quality, it leaves too many important questions unanswered and too many threads hanging. Just a few more well-placed beats would have made all the difference. Overall, though, this is a moving novel that addresses the structural misogyny in Australia's society, as well as the ways that it intersects with the persistent issue of racism. It constitutes a quietly powerful response to these things in the form of psychological suspense novels that refuses the heightened drama and conventional thriller territory. Though set in a dilapidated rural area around a tiny community impacted by tragedy, the story avoids trappings of outback crime and heroic metropolitan detectives. Instead, like Emily McGuire's An Isolated Incident, which was shortlisted for both Miles Franklin and the Stellar Prize, Traylor's novel foregrounds the female experience of violence and trauma considerately and thoughtfully. It confronts the legacy of male brutality without sidestepping the horrors or over-dramatizing them. A slow-burn tale about the power of female self-agency, Days of Innocence and Wonder, carries a quiet sense of hope and promises a protagonist who is finally able to grow up, and that in itself sets Till apart from the sad bad girls. So what I take the difference between these two books is, and it's kind of what I was sort of getting at earlier, which is having your character actually be accomplishing something, wanting something, striving for something, even if it's, I want to get married, I want to find my purpose, and I feel like I need to go in this direction to chase it. Like, even even if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to try different things thinking that it'll lead you in maybe the right direction until you find something else. And so in the case of this second book, it sounds like the character actually has a mission, which is get away from this situation. Whereas in the previous one, it is the character self-agonizing and sort of basking in her own lack of purpose and her feelings of existentialism. Which is going to be boring and usually is overwritten because you don't need 400 pages of I am a homewrecker and I feel bad about myself and now I'm sleeping with more people because the guy dumped me and I want to get back at him. Like that's not a compelling story at all. And you end up having a stronger characterization. I can't say anything about this other story because I haven't read it, but the difference that I see in the descriptions of the two of them is one has a goal, one has a story that exists outside of just being in her feelings, whereas this story sounds like it is entirely in her feelings and she's doing stupid things because all she is her feelings. The story is her feelings. And you really don't have a story if the story is just the character sitting mostly in their feelings. And you can tell because then most of the content in the story is them thinking about the things. If you go back to the review I did of Forbidden, that story didn't have to be so much in the characters' heads as it was, because they could have been actively doing something. But instead, the majority of the story is just them contemplating their life again and again and again and again, and it's so repetitive, and they're not doing anything. It's just existential, and it's basking and wallowing and taking pleasure in wallowing in their misery. And that's all that it is. But it would have been a much more compelling story if you're literally watching these people try to maybe avert CPS. I mean, that gives Locken and Maya something to actively do. And even if you go from chapter to chapter, okay, Locken needs to pass his classes at the highest rank so that he can get the money that he needs, so that he can apply for a scholarship to get to the college he wants to go to, so that he can afford to take care of his family. Meanwhile, Maya's goal is to make sure that Locken can actually focus on his studies. And then you make him actually so overwhelmed that maybe he fails something and he's freaking out about that. Or obviously his teacher says something about the suicide in his story and worries about that. There are so many ways that you could work this, but you need ultimately goals for your characters in order to give meaning to what they're doing. And this is all my opinion, okay? There is no single way to write a story. And everything that I'm saying is just like my preference and also how I think of storytelling and what I think of when I'm putting stories together. If you look at Bodymore, there's a lot of interpersonal stuff going on in that because Joey is dealing with her entire life. Her dad. I shouldn't, if I don't want to spoiler stuff, but she's dealing with plot the entire time as well. She's got her family issues and her trauma and whatever else is with her around her at all times. That is putting an impact on how she acts and how she interacts with other people and how she views things. But still, in book 1, you have her looking for Wayland. In 2, you have her looking for a solution of the problems that arose in book 1. And in book 3, you have her trying to find freaking Ralph because she needs him to help her not look crazy to the cops. I mean, the situation is just bad all around. Even in Bodymore Zero, which has less of a straightforward plot line as those 3 books, because it is more about Ralph becoming a medium, and then you get to see like what the shark tank that he's basically swimming in, okay? Because Ralph doesn't leave the bar for a reason, and you find out in Bodymore Zero why exactly he doesn't leave the bar. Though you see a glimpse of it in Bodymore 3 because the guy in Bodymore 3 shows up in Bodymore 1, and he has been there since day 1. He has been there since Ralph became a medium. He is a threat, and he is not the only threat in Baltimore. That's for sure. But you still have Casey, or you still have Ralph, whose life is, he's dealing with he's dealing with the situations of his life, right? But he still has goals, like Casey, this isn't a spoiler. Casey dies in the second chapter, whatever. That's the inciting incident. So it's not a spoiler, and also, he's a ghost in Bodymore. So Casey dies. And so then Ralph's goal is surviving without Casey until he discovers he can bring Casey back to life. So he's got a goal, and then he's dealing with his feelings and his emotions and the world around him while trying to accomplish that goal. And that makes the introspection actually meaningful because you're doing something that's not just rolling around in your feelings. And I don't know what it is, if it's underdeveloped ideas, if it's just these thoughts that like, oh, I have these feelings and I don't know if anybody else ever thought of these feelings. I don't know if it has to do with an obsession with philosophy or psychology that focuses on these things. But there are a lot of books that try to focus so much on like sensationalizing trauma. Go to Twitter and see how many people are talking about their books as being, I explore trauma, I explore mental illness, but it has no understanding of what that actually looks like. And it actually, most of the time, it reads like sensationalizing those things, especially when it's used as the sales moniker. And it's the same thing as when I'm reading or watching anything that is all about true crime. Absolutely, tell me when it is about true crime. But there's a way to sensationalize true crime and sell it as sensationalism, as opposed to honestly trying to share the story. Even in a dramatic sense, you can do it without sensationalizing it. And that's what I think has become a big thing, is thinking that you are suddenly deeper because you are addressing some of these things. But it doesn't, in so many cases, it doesn't get the exploration that it actually needs or the respect that it actually needs. It is just a sensationalizing thing in order to sell books and say, hey, I stand out, I'm special. Backtracking, sort of, taking it to the larger issue is, there are two ways that villains either go. A lot. Not all villains. There are two ways that poorly constructed villains typically go. One is either loading up all of the bad things possible onto that villain without reason. Oh, you don't need to say why they're a racist. You don't need to say why they're a pedophile. You don't need to say why they have all these bad things about them. Just load all of the bad things on them to prove that they are bad and give them no good qualities because they are not allowed to be good. Make them extreme. That happens a lot. Then you have the opposite effect where it's, well, they do bad things, but I'm going to super justify them because they are just a little sad boy. And you should feel bad for them, if not romance them. And they are not totally bad. Oh my gosh, I'm getting flashbacks to freaking dark romance where it's like, look, they might be bad, but here are them doing some good things that make up for them being bad. So they're not really that bad, right? And it's the narrative that tells you that all of the bad things they do are not actually that bad. Instead of letting the reader make decisions for themselves, it's like trying to make them morally gray forcefully by telling you that they're morally gray, but they're not actually morally gray if you don't listen to the narrator. And then there's the manipulation of the reader in using trauma to try to trick the reader into caring about who is the villain and who is not the villain. And Akatar freaking did this. And if you wanted the too long, didn't read on these books, I read A Court of Mist and Fury and A Court of Thorns and Roses and reviewed them here on the channel. You could go find the book reviews. But the important thing is here, in A Court of Mist and Fury, we watch Feyre talk to a new set of characters about the events of the first book. And in those discussions, we hear about how traumatized Rysand is, how traumatized all of his friends are. And we hear Feyre talk about how sad everybody is and how victimized everybody is, while she is also constantly insulting Tamlin, the main character, the main male character from the first book, and ignoring all of the trauma that he went through in trying to protect Feyre. And it uses this victimization of Rysand and company to try to elevate them as better people, while ignoring Tamlin's trauma to minimize his being a good person. And it's a manipulation tactic in order to make you feel bad for who it wants you to feel bad for, while ignoring the other guy because it wants you to hate the other guy. And this gets done a lot, of super focus on the traumas of the characters and want you to feel bad for. And you'll know of the traumas of the other guy. They'll either be implied or you'll have seen them and then you hear everybody ignoring them. Or you get the book where it just piles all of the negative things on your main character, on your love interest, in order to quickly build sympathy, in an attempt to quickly build sympathy. But the problem is there are so many traumatized main characters. A lot of stories feature traumatized main characters that are going to go through something or have been through something. And putting trauma in your first chapter, first 2 chapters, 3 chapters, specifically just to traumatize them, not as actual acts that move the story along, but just to force the reader to witness traumatizing, does not make them care about your character. It makes them go, why am I here? Why should I care that this character is going through this? Why should I be subjected to this when I don't care about this character? Why should I be hurt because the author is just trying to hurt me? It's the same thing with Out of Darkness. I never cared about those characters. And then you try to be like, well, I should care that they're being hurt. But I don't. They're not doing anything. They're not even trying to escape the abusive situation that they're in. And so trauma has quickly become an attempted shortcut at manipulating feelings, at sensationalizing, and in some cases at authors trying to say, I understand you, I'm a better person because look at me address trauma. And I don't think it works. I don't think it works that way. I think obviously trauma, negative experiences, and the exploration of mental illness, mental disorders, and just the bad things of the world all have a place in fiction. It should be done deliberately, though. It should be done with an attempt at respect. And if it's not, like, I'm not gonna go after anybody for doing anything. All I can do is tell you how I feel when I read a book, and that's basically all that I want to do. I'm not trying to control what anybody does, but I have feelings and I have ideas of what I think helps create a stronger story. And so that's more what I'm talking about here. Always do what you think is best. Throw the things out to your beta readers or your crit partners to see what they can tell you. Listen with an open heart to what makes sense to change. All feedback is not necessarily helpful. And then know that your readers are going to have their own experiences with your story. And that's just how it is. But somebody's critical feedback or somebody not liking your book is also not the end of the world, but also it's going to hurt really bad if you think that somebody is super deep and then other people are like. At some point, once you put your book out there to the wind, it is for people to have an experience with, and boy howdy, regardless of the book that you write, your reader will always have some sort of experience. That is for sure. I don't know where we are now, but we covered a lot of things. Trauma, sad girls, sad boys, the sad boy. Tell me how you feel about the sad boy. The sad boy. The sad squishy boy is a very common trope, I think, especially in YA. Nothing wrong with it. Just know what you're doing as you do it. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are on trauma in writing and how you write trauma. If you don't write, or how you read trauma, or how you feel about traumatized characters, or the introduction of trauma. If you're not a writer, I would still love to know, you're still open to answer the question about how you feel when trauma is included. With that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Looking forward to the discussions. With that said, have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?